I think what agents don't really understand and should is that the liability for disclosing natural hazards is not just the liability of the seller. It's the liability of the seller's agent. And if you read Civil Code 1103, very clearly it states the seller of any real property or the agent representing the seller shall make the following disclosures. So it's kind of funny that agents don't take more of an interest in the overall subject of natural hazard disclosure, but certainly in the selection of a company that really is there to protect their liability. That, I think, is utmost important and a fact that just goes over agents' heads, and it shouldn't.
This is the Real Estate Reckoning Podcast. Welcome to the Real Estate Reckoning Podcast. I'm Cara Ameer, alongside with my podcast partner in crime, Mr. Scott Cramer, the PhD of all things real estate. And today we are breaking down the Natural Hazard Disclosure Report Reckoning. What is this report? The 3 scariest words in a real estate disclosure. We've got 2 industry experts here to help us break it all down. We're here with Lina King and Chuck Piro of My NHD. Lina is a very seasoned professional. She's the regional manager for new business development for really across the country. She does work here in Orange County. And Chuck, wow, what an impressive resume. You are a seasoned professional in this space with nearly 30 years of experience. We're so excited to have you both. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
So let's get right into it. Like I was saying earlier, the Natural Hazard Disclosure Report. Lina, I'm going to start with you. The 3 scariest words. I mean, buying a house is stressful enough, right? And you're already nervous. This is the single largest transaction someone makes. And the words natural, hazard, and disclosure, well, they don't really give a warm and fuzzy feeling, do they? So maybe you can help put us at ease and explain what this report is, what the purpose of it is, and who is it for?
Okay, so this report gathers all this information for the seller to present to their buyer. And then the buyer has all this information to make an informed decision. And we're a third-party company that gathers this information and puts it in a little report for you, removing the liability from the agent, because in the past, agents were making these determinations incorrectly and there were lawsuits. So it's very, very important to have this information up front before you enter escrow. I like it before you go on to a listing appointment, which we have that ability to give you. And the most important things is that it affects the insurability of the home. It can make insurance costly and further development on the home if you plan on doing any kind of building for your home.
Very helpful. And so, Scott, let's talk about the, seller side of this.
Yeah, Chuck, for the, protection dynamics, what does the NHD report really do for the seller?
Well, that's a good question. What it does for the seller is that it helps the seller meet their mandatory disclosure requirements as set forth in California's Civil Code. Back in 1998, they passed laws that made disclosure of natural hazards a law. And this was based on lawsuits that had been filed, in California for people who didn't disclose known material facts about the property, trying to hide that stuff. Then it ends up always coming out because neighbors say, oh, did they tell you about this? Did they tell you about that? So they passed laws in 1998 that mandated that sellers disclose if the property for sale is located in a mapped hazard zone. The information contained in an NHD report is all publicly available information. The information comes from not only federal agencies, but also state and local agencies as well. It shows whether the property lies in mapped hazard zones like floods, fires, and earthquake zones. It's to inform the buyer before the decision to buy. It reduces the risk of the seller being sued later for non-disclosure. And it just prevents those "why didn't you tell me" lawsuits that always seem to crop up after the sale. Now, keep in mind, these reports don't guarantee that the home is safe or whether a catastrophic event is going to happen. but it does give the seller the protection they need when it comes to this disclosure.
Excellent, excellent. So, Lina, what are the critical red flags? Some of the things that identify specific information and the hazard zones that should immediately trigger for both agents and clients in these reports?
I think right now the biggest things are flood and fire because these trigger insurance. We give you this information up front. You can go to our website and get it. And these are things you should know when you go on a listing appointment, so you can discuss this with your sellers, because they don't have this information either. Even though when they bought the house, they probably got one of these reports and they, signed it, but they didn't really understand it. This information is updated. Recently, we just updated the fire maps. Homes that were not in a fire area are now in a fire area. Sellers aren't really aware of that. And same with the flood.
So the
Those are
seller,
updated daily.
if they're thinking about selling their house, they could actually go to mynhd.com and do a little preliminary investigation before they actually sit down and talk to an agent.
That's correct. That's correct.
Excellent. So what are the deal killers, Lina? Why do transactions blow up? What are the interpretation failures? Exploring if deals collapse simply because consumers and agents don't know how to interpret raw mapping data.
Right. I think just not having the information ahead of time before you go into escrow, before you make an offer on a property, and then these things coming to light after. But if you just have it and you can explain it, it's all very normal stuff. And it's just in the way you present it, calmly and just, this is just how it is. And there's not much you can do about it.
So you have some sales materials that agents can actually use with a seller to fully explain in a very simplistic way as to what the report is, what it covers, how to deter any type of a situation.
Yes, just knowing this information up front is the best way to prepare for that.
Excellent.
And so let's talk about, like you said, it's best to get this report ahead of time and be able to explain it in a calm and professional manner. But let's talk about, the agents are really on the front lines with these reports, right? So whether you do order it before you list a property, which I think is always excellent practice, or sometimes, it's until you open escrow, the seller doesn't get it, the buyers don't have it. Talk to me about the agent guidance in helping understand, interpret, and explain these reports. Do you feel that agents really have all the skill sets to do that today? Are they falling short? And how can they do better in working in conjunction with their natural hazard disclosure representative?
Well, most of the people that I work with do add me to their team. I am part of their team. They trust me to speak with their sellers. They trust me to speak with their buyers. They know that they should have me, an experienced NHD rep as part of their team to help deter any kind of questions like that. But yes, most agents don't really understand the importance of reading the report and understanding it until they have a problem and they've reached out to me, and then they learn and they go, oh, okay, well, I'll know that for next time. But they understand that they need to have me on speed dial for sure.
And so do you ever speak to actual consumers in these situations, or is it really just funneled through the agent?
Both. Sometimes it's a 3-way call. Sometimes they just, Lina, you handle it, you talk to them, or sometimes I educate the agent, and if they can handle it, that's fine. Or sometimes they just said, hey, I gave my sellers or my clients your phone number, they're going to, call you. And I say, great, I will take excellent care of it.
Because sometimes communication of information can kind of get lost along the way, right? Like whisper down the lane. I mean, maybe the concept is there, but, words matter. And if you don't explain this correctly, it could really cause alarm or cause people to really get unnerved. So let's talk about when we get these reports, Chuck, are there certain situations where the natural hazard disclosure report dictates further testing or evaluation? It says there should be physical inspections ordered.
Well, yeah, first of all, the report is not based on any kind of physical inspection. All of these reports are mapped red disclosures are what they are. Now, of course, that could bring up a lot of questions from the consumer. Look, who has the questions about this stuff? It's the buyers who have the questions for the most part. That's who we would communicate with. I mean, Lina and I both have been referred to, hey, will you talk to my buyer? They want to know about this situation. Yeah, but again, it's based on map red disclosure, not a physical inspection of the property. So when it comes to any kind of testing, that's just going to be if the buyer wants testing, and they can go ahead and test. It's not going to change anything on the report. Let me go back a little bit about agents and what they know about these reports. I think what agents don't really understand and should is that the liability for disclosing natural hazards is not just the liability of the seller. It's the liability of the seller's agent. And if you read Civil Code 1103, very clearly it states the seller of any real property or the agent representing the seller shall make the following disclosures. So it's kind of funny that agents don't take more of an interest in the overall subject of natural hazard disclosure, but certainly in the selection of a company that really is there to protect their liability. That, I think, is utmost important, and a fact that just goes over agents' heads, and it shouldn't.
I think you make a
We're
great
going to
point.
correct that, aren't we? We're going to come up with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are.
Yeah, I mean, you make a great point, and there's too much today of check the box, click, click, click. I'm doing this because I have to. Nobody's, really taking time to understand the details. I know you have put together this really helpful consumer FAQ sheet, and I think that's a great reference, and we will, certainly link to that in our show notes. But just some interesting tidbits. I was reviewing that sheet, and there were some things that I was enlightened about that I want to ask you. And number one is that the natural hazard disclosure report industry is not regulated. So talk to me about that. And how is that, and should it be?
Absolutely, it should be. Let me tell you about what non-regulation, let me see if I have these in my notes. Here's what non-regulation allows to happen. As it pertains to NHD companies and providers, there's no licenses or certifications given to NHD companies. Anybody can open up a company. There's no background checks for these companies or the people that run these companies. Bonds aren't required. No one validates the credentials or the qualifications of the people producing these reports as specified in California Civil Code. No one even confirms compliance that the reports that they sell meet the requirements of the seller. So non-regulation is bad for everybody, most certainly the sellers of real estate who rely on these companies to protect their liability and to put them in compliance with the law. So again, anybody, and we've seen this over the last 30 years, companies come and companies go. Companies get real creative with the names of how they name their companies. For example, what company do you want to use? Hey, an agent just could put on their seller's choice. Okay. Do you know there's a company called Seller's Choice Disclosures that could argue, hey, that's my deal, when the agent never intended it to go there because they had no idea that a company like that even existed. So, yeah, non-regulation's just not a good thing. But non-regulation for us sets us apart from all of our competitors in a lot of different ways. And one of the biggest ways it separates us is we're the only company out there, the only major company, I should say, that doesn't require you to go to court in the event that there's a non-disclosure lawsuit. These companies out there like to boast about how much E&O insurance they carry. E&O doesn't prevent you from having to go to court. That's the very thing agents don't want to do, is go to court. So I think due diligence should be top priority for any agent selecting an NHD company. In fact, on the signature line in the NHD report, on the signature page, one of the first things it says is seller agents have exercised good faith in the selection of their NHD company. And I just wonder how many agents have really looked at these companies and deciphered which one is best for them or their agents or their sellers, because nobody wants to go to court, yet in every one of these instances, except for us, they have small claims court and arbitration clauses in their terms and conditions. It has nothing to do with the amount of E&O insurance. It's the fact that you're going to have to take time out of your day and go to court. And sometimes that's going to be in a county that the subject property doesn't lie in. So you may have to travel someplace else, and nobody wants to do that.
And you bring up a great point, because that was another piece I was going to ask you. I mean, the terms and conditions, who would think to read those? But agents should be, because the details do matter. And like you said,
yeah.
You don't figure this out until there's a lawsuit. And like you said, now you got to go somewhere else. And, do some of these companies that come out of nowhere, it almost reminds me of these contractors that, have complaints against them. They go out of business, but I mean, they're regulated, but they reincarnate under a new name. And then they still continue, they continue on with maybe shady business practices. And it sounds like in this business, you could have a provider kind of come up out of nowhere, and then they're nowhere to be found, right? I mean, let's say there's a problem.
That's happened many times over the years. And a question really has to be posed here. How long are these reports good for? Well, it's good until the buyer becomes a seller. So the report really never goes away. And you might have a company that was here today, gone tomorrow. What's going on? What happens to those guys? Now they're sitting on a defunct company with a report now that's not backed by anything. So it's non-regulation, again, so important, yet doesn't apply in this industry. It's like the Wild West. Terms and conditions, fine print disclaimers. To me, the smaller the print, the bigger the message. You've got to read that stuff. You can't go to court and say, well, I didn't read this. Well, I didn't know that was there. That's not an excuse. You got to know what you're doing.
Maybe the terms and conditions should be blown up to like 20 to 25 point fonts. And
there you go.
That should be on the first page of the disclosure before you get to everything else.
Right.
Great points. And then the other thing that I wondered about, because I am licensed and I practice in Florida and here in California. So are NHD reports a thing in other markets, in other, states? Are they required anywhere else but California?
Well, a few years ago, they tried to make these reports non-mandatory in Arizona. This was back a few years ago. And it's tough to catch any traction when you don't have to do it. It doesn't matter how much sense it makes to get one of these reports to protect you from one of those "why didn't you tell me" lawsuits. But there is an effort, certainly on our part, to expand this technology, this report, to other states, including Arizona, Texas, and I believe Florida as well is on our target list.
Florida is included.
Yeah. So, it might not be mandatory today, but the wheels are in motion to make that happen.
I mean, I think with so many extreme weather events going on today, and it's all over, it's, not even just isolated anymore to Florida or California. I mean, as we're recording this, there's horrible flooding going on in Texas. There's fires up in Minnesota that are going into Canada. So, these are things that everybody has to be aware of. And as insurance has become increasingly complicated, which we'll get into, I think it's really important. And it just shocks me that nobody on the regulatory level, legislatures or whatnot, want to make this a requirement for consumer protection because, look, people don't buy or sell their home every day. You don't know what you don't know. Having been in Florida through numerous hurricanes, seeing flooding, seeing people trying to deal with the challenges of their homeowners insurance, which, oh, by the way, no, sorry, we don't cover you. Water got in through the roof. Oh, no, that's not us. All this sort of dancing, and you just want your house fixed and you're being put through red tape. If people understood it better, they could prepare better and determine whether they want to take the risk. So all great points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And wouldn't you just want that liability off of you and hire a company to do it for you? I mean, that's a no-brainer.
People are like today, everybody's attention spans are short. Just give me the bottom line. Give me the big picture. Here's what I need to know. I know in Florida, flood zones have changed tremendously. And just because you were in a zone that didn't require insurance doesn't mean that it, could not be required later, because those things change all the time, even though the property never flooded. But, you had to go to the FEMA maps. You had to go to the state maps. So it can be, really frustrating. So as we're talking about natural disasters and insurance, let's talk about the insurance reckoning on these reports with page 2 of your report that talks about floods and fires. Help us understand that. And how can this affect the ability of, the property to get insurance? Is the NHD report connected to what an insurance company looks at? Lina or Chuck, whoever wants to.
So that page 2, we call it the signature page. That is the page that everybody signs that they have read and understood everything in the report. Everybody signs it except for the buyer's agent. It's because the buyer's agent doesn't have the responsibility of these disclosures. They're more on the due diligence side. But also, it's important to know that because of these disclosures, it doesn't determine the insurability of the home. Insurance companies, they have their own information and if they're going to charge this insurance or not. Am I right, Chuck?
Yes. Insurance companies cannot use NHD reports to determine rates. That's not the scope of that's not lawful for an insurance company to refer to. They look at the same information that we do. They look at FEMA maps, and they will determine if the property needs flood insurance or not. They look at fire maps. They don't need to look at our reports because they're looking at the same fire maps, presumably, that we look at as well. So insurance there's no correlation between the two. The report will alert you to the fact that you're in a fire zone. And what does that mean? You're going to have to pay for more insurance. That's what it means. But in terms of them using our reports, they can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But the report could say that you're not in a fire zone, but the insurance company will come back and say you still need the additional fire insurance. It's because the ember zones, they go deeper, and NHD companies were disclosing the high and the very high severity zones for real estate purposes. And that's different than insurance. So it doesn't mean that the report is wrong because it said the property is outside the fire zone, but you could still have that insurance if the fire zone is across the street. Mm-hmm.
And that gets very confusing for the consumer, right? Because, and of course the insurance company that's going to insure you they're going to take a hard line, right? Because they're all about mitigating risk. So yeah, it's like, well, my NHD report said I'm not. And, then the consumer calls us panicked, but I called 3 insurance companies and they're telling me I'm all in a fire zone. Now I have to get fire insurance. What does this all mean? Are they wrong? And yeah, we've been through that movie before and running interference, but again, a deep level of understanding, like you just explained beautifully about the ember zones, because that's not something most people think about.
No, embers can fly miles, literally miles out of fire zones into areas that are not fire zones. We've seen that happen numerous times in California over the last few years.
Great points.
Hey, So, Lina, tell us about other potential reckonings on the report. We've talked about earthquakes, we've talked about fire zones. What about fault lines, liquefaction zones? House is going to slide into the ocean here in California. Maybe some other hazards like dry cleaners, gas stations that are close by. Just touch on some of these things.
Yeah, so all of these hazards are out there, and it's all very normal stuff. Freeways are built over earthquake faults. Homes are built over old military sites. All this stuff, is normal stuff. It all depends on your comfort level. And because we've got, people moving in here from other states, and maybe their experiences and their comfort level, they don't want to be near certain sites like this. It doesn't mean that it's going to kill the deal. But like I said, it's in the way you present it. And we really dig deep, and we get maps, and we show them the probability of something like this happening. Even a school will show up on the environmental, because in their science labs are working with these chemicals, and dry cleaners have tanks underground, and eventually those leak, and they're policed by the state. But we also have record of it, if it's been cleaned up, if it's in remediation, were they cited. We really give you all the facts right there, but we tell them this is all very normal stuff.
Cara, I think you had a transaction at one point that falls under this category.
Yes. Well, two things on that. One, buying my first property in California a few years ago, I didn't know what the NHD report is. And I'm getting this thing, on email. And yeah, the neighborhood dry cleaner in the Strip shopping center, like right across the street, almost catty corner from the, development. I'm like, what does this mean? Should we be concerned? Like, why? Oh my gosh, is this, are we going to be inhaling some kind of bad air? But the second is, I was had a transaction involving a buyer in San Clemente a few years ago, and the radon levels were reported high on the NHD report. And of course, that caused a little bit of panic. And, the consumer thought, well, did this company come in here and measure the radon levels in this house? Like, how did they do that? Did this all just happen through osmosis? And, obviously radon can trigger concern. It's, up north, it's very common in basements, and they have ways to mitigate it out. And it almost comes up in every home inspection, in the North and the Midwest. My mother went through that when she was selling her house in Chicago. But, talk to us about those kinds of things like radon, because it's one of those problems that, public records, right? Department of Interior, we learned where this information was coming from. No, the company didn't go through the house, but how do you make sense of that as a consumer? I mean, everybody has to determine what kind of risk level they're, okay with, but it's not necessarily something you could just go get a test easily. I mean, there are tests, but if you're trying to do this in an occupied house where you have to get a test kit from Home Depot and have the windows closed until, in a house with no air conditioning by the beach, it's probably not going to go over so well with the seller.
All right, let me jump in on that one if I can for a second. First of all, the report, when it comes to radon, it's not saying your house has radon. It's not what it says. You're in an area of elevated radon, not particularly your house, but you're in an area of. So if you really wanted to find out, you would have to further test your house to see if the radon levels were something of concern. You can't assume by a determination on an NHD report that it affects your space in your house. But let me touch on the dry cleaning thing, because those come up in every environmental report. Would be, oh my God, dry cleaners. Hey, if that, you would expect that if that was a dangerous situation, you'd go in your dry cleaners and they'd all be wearing hazmat suits before they hand you your clean clothes. Okay. Hey, they're in there like you and I are in there. They don't have masks on. They're not protecting themselves. They work with environmentally sensitive material. That's what triggers that determination on a report. And by the way, I think we should note that an NHD report, the complete report, has three parts to it. There's the natural hazard section of the report, there's the tax and assessment section of the report. And both of those sections have to do with the property for sale. The environmental report has nothing to do with the property for sale. It's about what's going on around the property. And really, it points out things that you find in every community that we live in. And that's going to be schools that we're talking about, and businesses like gas stations and tire places and all of these companies that transport or deal with environmentally sensitive material. So it's important to note that that's not a mandatory disclosure to be made. There's no civil code reference to the disclosure of this stuff around your property. However, in California over the past several years, it's become a standard of care disclosure that agents typically, and you can go to the car website and you're going to say, yeah, and an environmental report is going to be required. Just know that it's not a mandatory requirement. And that's why, again, we'll fall back to, you got to use the right company so that if your clients have questions about this stuff, they can go to your consultant. And like Lina had mentioned earlier, she's a part of several real estate agents' team as an NHD expert. I think every real estate agent needs to have an NHD expert as part of their team so that we can help you explain these things to concerned buyers. Hey, these concerns are real. You can't minimize their concerns, as minimal as they really are. You can't minimize them. They're a concern to this person. They just need a reasonable explanation and somebody to tell them, don't worry about it. This isn't going to harm you, because these things are found all over the place. And they are.
Yeah. I mean, if you're coming to California from somewhere else, you put it beautifully, Chuck. I mean, all these environmental hazards are around you too. The dry cleaner, the tire shop, the school where they're dissecting the frogs. I mean, that's all going on. It's just that, because we talked about, the lack of regulation, other states, this is not required. So all of a sudden, the consumer's hit with this report and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm buying into some toxic, hazardous thing. So understanding, taking the time to, that's half the battle in overcoming these concerns. And, the consumer wants to, of course, they want insurance and to know it's all going to be okay at the end.
Right. When it comes to this is another good point. The people that have the most questions are going to be typically people coming in from out of state. And you get the question, oh my God, my house is, on an earthquake fault zone. What does that mean? My first question to them is, where are you moving here from? Well, I'm moving here from Arizona. Welcome to California. Okay. We're an earthquake state. And believe it or not, whether you're in an earthquake fault zone or not, it doesn't minimize your risk of your house being damaged as a result of an earthquake. Earthquake fault zones are only a quarter of a mile wide. And to think for a second that if that fault were to slip, that the damage would be confined to that quarter mile of slot is ridiculous. Many, many years ago in San Diego on an Easter Sunday morning, there was an earthquake that shook our residents in San Diego County. The earthquake happened in Imperial County, which was 100 miles away. And had that earthquake been another click on the Richter scale, it could have caused damage to homes that were in nowhere near earthquake fault zones. So you need to explain to people that one doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have damage done. Okay. There was an earthquake in Northridge several years ago. Billions of dollars in damage was done in LA County as a result of this earthquake. They didn't even know the earthquake fault existed. It was a non-discovered fault. So we only know what we know when it comes to earthquake faults, as this is a ongoing study of fault zones. But as it comes to, should I worry about this? In a typical real estate transaction, Buyer puts up 20%, bank finances 80. Who's got more skin in the game? The bank does. If the bank was worried about the fact that the home was in an earthquake zone, they would force the resident, the homeowner, to purchase earthquake insurance. Earthquake insurance is not mandatory. If you're in an earthquake zone, I own my home. Every year I get a letter from my mortgage holder. Do you want to purchase earthquake insurance? No. I've heard it's really difficult to collect on earthquake insurance. Number one, I had some guy tell me if your house gets damaged in an earthquake, light it on fire. You're better off, you probably collect better on a fire claim than an earthquake claim. But they just need the reassurance that so out-of-state buyers and first-time buyers, and only those people who actually take time to read the reports will have questions. Okay. And I think these questions are easily answered by a qualified NHD professional like Lina that could walk these people through these processes.
Top listing agents like Cara and myself.
There you go.
Correct.
So, I mean, you just said it. I mean, so Chuck, these natural hazard disclosure reports, friend or foe, how can we as agents better engage with you to really be a resource for us to understand them, not to call you with every fire drill. I mean, of course, I know you'd be more than happy to help because that's what you're here for. But, to be intelligent about it, not just what does this mean? To take the time to, really engage with you. What are the full array of resources that you have that we can tap into? Talk to us about your website, your app, maybe there's other reports we should be aware of.
Well, one of the unique things that My NHD has, and we touched on this earlier, there's an app that we make available to all real estate agents called My Has Check. And My Has Check you can put on your phone, and prior to going on a listing appointment, you can tap into that app, type in the subject property's address, and it'll let you know if the property is in two of the most important hazard zones that have financial implications are going to be, as we've talked about, fire zones and flood zones. That app will let you know if that property is in either of those zones. Fire zones, we've talked about it, thousands and thousands of properties that weren't in fire zones a couple of years ago are now in fire zones. People were getting letters saying now you got to pay fire insurance. Flood zones is another thing. But let me touch on something about flood zones. Flood zones are based on elevations. And there could be the occasion when the house that's sitting on a parcel in a flood zone is above the base flood elevation. Let's say the parcel is on a hill and the house is built on top of the hill. The structure of the house is out of the flood zone because it's out at an elevation out of the flood zone. What does My NHD do for that situation? We provide the client, the seller, with a piece of paper, a document called a flood cert. And the flood cert will verify if the structure on the parcel is in the flood zone. So let me back up a minute. NHD reports are based on parcels, not on the house. It's on the parcel. If any part of the parcel is in the flood zone, if the flood zone is 1 foot onto the parcel, then it's in a flood zone. The house might not be even near the flood zone. So the flood cert would tell you, no, the house isn't in the flood zone. Parcel is, house isn't. That should be a nice thing because now the insurance company won't require flood insurance because the house isn't in it. Not all companies do that. This is a great document, a great feature that clients get using a company like My NHD. Okay. Another thing that agents should review, and they should know this prior to even showing the property to somebody, would be the tax part of the report. Is this property encumbered with special assessments like Melrose? And if so, how much is it going to cost? Those are the things I think that agents need to review just as part of their due diligence. is to review that before they hand it over to their seller, and certainly before it gets into the hands of a buyer, because buyer's going to ask these questions. That's when they call us. Hey, my buyer has questions. Can you help me? Absolutely. They just need a reasonable explanation and what these things mean. Mello-Roos, it's out there. These are assessments that are collected to build the infrastructure in these subdivisions. Okay, they can't get money from the state, so they sell bonds to build the things that people benefit from when they live in one of these subdivisions. Things like schools, streets, fire protection agencies, could be hospitals. The list is endless what Mello-Roos pays for. So it's a benefit to the people who live within the community. How much are those things? Hey, it depends on, it just depends on a lot of factors. But the thing to note is there could be as many as 6 different Mello-Roos assessments on one property. And those assessments last how long? 20, 25 years. Okay. Now, when somebody buys a house, you have to disclose stuff like that. The important thing is that when somebody buys, they don't start at day one. They take off from where the buyer left off. So if somebody's lived there for 20 years and it's a 25-year bond, then the new buyer coming in only has to pay for that for 5 years. That's part of a very complicated disclosure of Mello-Roos. I hope that's not too confusing.
No, it's, and even though it is flagged in multiple listing service listings, if there's Mello-Roos, it's absolutely something to pay attention to, because that can completely change the mortgage payment. I mean, some of these, like you said, these Mello-Roos, you're adding on several $1,000s to the tax bill every year. And so a buyer needs to know that even before they go out looking, hey, are you okay with this or are you not? Because if you're not, let's just eliminate that totally from our search criteria.
Exactly. That could disqualify a buyer just like that with the amount of Mello-Roos. Exactly. But, here's a bigger question. If I'm an agent and I'm taking you around and showing you houses and you like the house on Main Street and I tell you that's in a Mello-Roos district, what's the first thing you're going to want to know about that? First thing's going to be, how much is it going to cost me? Okay, well, it's another $1,000 a year. That's not the end of that disclosure. You also have to disclose the next logical thing is, how long do I have to pay for this thing? Okay, well, you got to pay for it for the next 5 years. Can it go up? Yeah, it could go up to $2,000 a year as soon as they finish phase 2. Okay, well, what is it I'm paying for? That's another part of the disclosure. Or you're paying for the high school, you're paying for the fire department, whatever the heck it is you're paying for. Okay, can it go up? How much can it go up in 1 year? Well, it's not going to double in a year. There's a max that it can go. It could increase by 2% in any given year. Okay. Who do I call if I have more questions about this? Well, here's the agency that is responsible for administrating these fees or these costs. But it's a 6-part disclosure of Mello-Roos. Our company gives you all 6 parts of that disclosure. Other companies don't do that. And missing any one of those 6 parts could be a non-disclosure lawsuit. So again, agents, you got to do due diligence to make sure the company, you don't give your NHD report to the fun-loving, happy-go-lucky guy that walks in your office, or the girl that brings you donuts every Monday morning. They're not going to be there to help you if there's a lawsuit. You got to do your job and pick the right company. And there's a lot of differences between these companies out there.
And pick the right
Mello-Roos,
is teamed up with the right company.
Yeah, exactly.
And Mello-Roos 101, Chuck, I think you've got a class there. I mean, I would venture if you knocked on doors in some of these Mello-Roos communities, would the seller even know that there were 6 parts to this disclosure? They'd probably be like, I don't know. We just were told it's this and this is what we pay for. And yeah, it went up a little bit here or there, but we have no idea.
Yeah.
So I think there's a course here to be taught.
Well,
maybe you and Lina could.
Absolutely.
Let's do it.
One of the parts of that is, when does this end? When's the end date? Hey, some of these things are in perpetuity. You're going to pay for that assessment as long as you live in that house. These are typically maintenance assessments. So when you drive into these neighborhoods, they all look really beautiful. That's because they paid services that keep that place beautiful. Go look in the backyard. you'll see a quite different story in the backyard. You know?
I mean, Florida has the same thing. It's called community development district. It's like it's the East Coast version of Melrose. They're bonds. They tend to run in 30 years. Yeah, and all these beautiful master plan communities with the pools and the parks and the pickleball and, the golf cart trails. You're paying for that through the CDD fee, as we call it. And yeah, we don't have disclosure reports, but we do have a disclosure. And these bonds keep getting higher with each new development because the costs go up and everybody has to have over-the-top amenities now. It's not just a neighborhood pool. I have to feel like I'm on a resort, right? So,
yes.
So now let's transition to, Scott's favorite topic that I know he's just been dying to talk about.
Chopping at the bit. So Assembly Bill 38, Lina, the wildfire reckoning that is coming. Tell us about the statutory compliance, what it's about, the wildfire compliance mandates, what it means for Southern California, where it is today, where it's possibly going tomorrow, and how this is going to impact costs.
Okay, so AB 38 is the law that requires you to disclose if your property's in a fire zone, right? And with that said, you're disclosing certain vulnerabilities to your property. There's this form called an FHDS form where you're going to fill out, the seller's going to fill out that information. And it's just disclosing vulnerabilities to the property and letting them know which agency is going to come to them in the event of a wildfire and what other disclosures need to be done. The fire inspection will be coming around and inspecting their property. They are already doing this and they probably don't even know it, but they're, looking through drone images and making sure that there's a vegetation management ordinance and that the property is in compliance.
So
AB 38 is really aimed at reducing wildfire risks in homes. That's what it is. So when you're in a fire zone, you're mandated to fill out this FHDS form. That form takes on like two different things. One is going to be wildfire vulnerabilities, and there's a questionnaire that the seller fills out, exposing the vulnerabilities to only homes built before 2010. So if you're in a home built before 2010 and you're in a fire zone, you have to fill out the questionnaire. Does my house have wood shingle shakes? Does it have dual pane windows? Is there any attached decks, etc.? Okay. It isn't a fix-it ticket. It's just letting the new buyer know these are the areas of vulnerability. Now, for all other homes in fire zones, AB 38 is about defensible space requirements. And defensible space isn't something new to somebody who already lives in that house and lives in a fire zone. The seller of that house has already dealt with, in most cases, has dealt with the Cal Fire and the fire department, who comes by on a somewhat regular basis to make sure that the home conforms to defensible space, keeping things trimmed away. I mean, it's common sense. It's just common sense. Keep the flammable stuff away from your house so your house doesn't burn down. So the second part of this questionnaire deals with inspections. Okay. Do I need an inspection? It's amazing that agents want to just kick that can down the road and put the responsibility of the inspection to the new buyer. To me, I think a feature of a home for sale would be a compliant certificate of compliance. A clear certificate of compliance is a feature. Let me put it to you this way. If you're a real estate agent and you're showing a potential buyer homes in an area, the area might be in a fire zone. So every house you show this buyer, because they like this area, it's a fire zone area. Okay. So let's say they're down to 2 or 3 houses. They're all about the same. They're 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. They cost $900,000. Okay.
Where's
One
that?
of them,
Sold.
yeah, one of them has a clear certificate of compliance from the fire department. Nothing needs to be done. The other 2, those sellers are asking the buyers, hey, we want you to go get the compliance, and you can do that within a year. Well, what happens in that year? Stuff grows, and when they don't get the certificate of compliance, the fire department says, oh no, you gotta trim this, you gotta do this, you gotta do this at a cost of $5,000. Okay. Wow, why didn't I get that done before I bought this house? Okay. I think that agents are doing their sellers a service by recognizing the fact that the house is in a fire zone. Get a certificate of compliance. It'll be easier to sell your house. How much did it cost? It used to be free not too long ago. Now fire inspections cost $200 or less for the most part. Okay. And if you have to have work done on your house, let's say you had $5,000 worth of work done on your house, then put it on the sale price of the house. Instead of selling it for $850, sell it for $855 and get your money back and get rid of all the potential hiccups that come with all the fire stuff that's going on. Does that make sense?
Does. Agreed.
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah,
I
I mean,
didn't mean to jump in on you, but
No,
I
great
love
idea.
it. Please
Thank
do.
you. Thank
Yeah.
you. I want to
I
know
love
where
it.
that $900,000 house is. I'll go out and buy it right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you just answered, what does the seller need to do? And I think you put it beautifully. You're helping insulate your value. You're being proactive, especially in this kind of market where buyers are shaky, they're fragile, they have payment shock. Any little thing, even on inspection reports, maybe it is the Home Depot repair list, so to speak, and it's not major things, but it's a lot of, and I don't want to say little because nothing's really little, but it's just a lot of these types of I need a good handyman kind of things. And it's just layering on top of, then they go to do, this. And it's like, I've got to take out $5,000 to $7,000 worth of vegetation. I don't feel so good about this. Goodbye. I'm walking away. And the seller now has lost a buyer. They got to disclose all this. They, have to come back on the market. The biggest challenge I think today is a lot of these sellers, this well, Scott, nobody on the seller side either has the money. So I can't afford to do it just because a lot of these seller situations where they're selling it's a long-time rental property. Somebody died. Somebody's going into assisted living. They maybe just have 2 dimes to rub together. It was their parents' house. And, I don't have the money to do it. But at least at the very minimum, someone could, get this checked out and have a quote and account for that in your negotiation, if nothing else.
Exactly. We have a new thing that's coming up, and that's something called Zone 0. And Zone 0 is removing all flammable materials from 0 to 5 feet from your house. Okay. Now, this is an ambitious requirement because if we're talking about financial implications, this is a huge financial project for anybody living in a house in a fire zone. You've got agents that want to, let's improve the curb appeal. Let's put bark all around right next to your house. And all you're doing is increasing the flammability of the house. And all that stuff's got to be taken away. So to note, Zone 0 has a huge financial impact on homeowners wanting to sell their property. Thankfully, they've kicked that requirement down the road because they're understanding the financial commitments or requirements that this is encumbering on homeowners. So this is at least 2027 before it becomes a law. And when it does become a law, people will have 3 years of a ramp up before it becomes mandatory in the sale of a house. I think people need to know that. So it gives them plenty of time.
My understanding of AB 38 today, too, is it's not mandatory in the state in every area. So I do understand through Lina's explanation that it is mandatory to be taken care of in Ventura County. And there's some other cities, Lina, you might want to expand on that you know
Yeah.
about other cities that have implemented this.
Yeah, we just found out it was mandatory in the city of Riverside, not the county of Riverside, but the city of Riverside. There are some cities in San Diego, Lakeside, San Diego, Truckee, California, up north, and what's that other?
Paradise.
Paradise. Thank you, Paradise. Yeah, but they're being added. Yeah, that's not there anymore. Yeah, but there are new cities being added all the time. It's a fluid situation, and you can make one phone call to the city and find out if there's a point of sale requirement in your city. Some counties will say yes, and some will say no. Don't always ask ChatGPT, because we've had two people do that, and one chat said yes and chat said no. So chat's not perfect on that yet, but
it's common sense. It's just, again, common sense. Point of sale requirements is what we're talking about, not AB 38. AB 38 is going to be required if you're in a fire zone, doesn't matter what. The point of sale requirement means, do you need a clear certificate of compliance before you sell your house? Okay. And Lina just mentioned the areas that yes, legally you have to do that. I'm going to tell you right now, it's coming to every city in California. You're going to have a point of sale requirement. You're going to have a clear certificate of compliance to sell your house. Do I need this? Yeah, get it. It helps you sell your house. That's the answer to the question. Do I need to have this certificate of compliance? Yeah, if you want to sell your house without any hiccups, yeah, get it. Get the thing done. Common sense. It's
Well said. On that note, Cara?
These were all great points. Is there anything else, as far as that we need to recap? I mean, a lot of great points. Get your NHD report early and often. Get it up front. Review that with the seller. Have it at the ready to give to a buyer. Surprise is never a good thing in real estate. Have your fire compliance done. If it's a point of sale requirement, go ahead and get it done, but get ready because this is coming. And, this has been a wealth of information. Thank you so much for joining us today. I had learned a tremendous amount. I feel like I'm able to now next level my natural hazard disclosure report knowledge. I look forward to working with both of you. You're certainly on my team, that's for sure. And hopefully we can, help educate our buyers and sellers and make them certainly more comfortable with the process.
Thanks for tuning in to The Real Estate Reckoning. Make sure you're subscribed and share this episode with someone who needs to hear the truth about buying and selling real estate. We will be back with more reckonings soon.